Welcome to Citizen One, the case against digital identity, written and narrated by Paul G. Conlon. That's me. If you'd like to support my work, you can get the paperback at paulgconlon.com. That's Conlon. I've also got a free newsletter there, or just visit your favourite online retailer. My genuine thanks for your attention, and I hope you enjoy this deeply personal story. Prologue. Danke, bitte, guten Tag. Thanks, please, good day. 4 simple German words that irrevocably altered the course of history for my family. 4 simple German words hastily thrown together by a US Army soldier during his mission to liberate Berlin in 1945. His rifle was pointed directly at a terrified young German woman, his bloodied finger quivering over the trigger. That young woman was to become my loving and gentle grandmother, my Oma. The soldier struggled with the dilemma before him. He struggled to identify her. Was she just a German who should be slain like the many others who had stared down his barrel over the prior weeks? Or was she simply a young woman caught in the crosshairs of a horrifying war, deserving of a chance at life? Did her identity span both possibilities? These timeless questions strike at the heart of our human existence and social order. What truly identifies us? How do we assign meaning to identity? And what are the consequences when judgments inevitably follow? Perhaps most crucially, who wields the power to make these determinations? Identity is a matter of life and death in government hands. To the Nazi government, otherwise known as the Third Reich, my Oma's fate was of no concern. She was just a number stamped on a mandatory ID card years prior and left to the whims of invading soldiers. Are we forgetting history's lessons? How do they apply to you in the digital ID age? Today, we are sleepwalking into a societal restructure based on uneven information sharing between ourselves and our governments. A structure where our identities are becoming transparent to government, while government is becoming opaque to us. A structure that we now, like Germans then, would not have chosen had we been paying more attention. Digital ID points the rifle at entire nations and places the government's bloodied finger over the trigger. It gifts anonymous, corruptible bureaucrats the same power over us that a US Army soldier once held over my Oma. So how did we get here? This book exposes the enduring justifications for centralized identity registration and their predatory outcomes. It challenges the belief that this time it's different. Together, we'll explore the essence of identity, trust, technology, and governmental power, revealing the simple fact that some will always seek to exploit these for harm. But amidst these horrors, this is really a story about love over coercion. My family history shows how love can fulfill our collective responsibility to resist the datification and commodification of our identities, and it's my honour to share it with you. Chapter 1. Lessons from my Oma. Let me tell you a love story. It's a story born from war. It's the story of my family, and it starts with my beloved paternal grandmother, my Oma. Born in Germany in 1922, she was a woman of strength, traditional morals, and unwavering principles. She shared with me her life experiences and fostered in me a passion for liberty, responsibility, and above all, self-identity. These values came in part from her father, Fritz. He'd been awarded the prestigious Iron Cross for bravery in World War I. This honour came from climbing a tree under artillery fire to sight enemy positions at the 1917 Battle of Passchendaele. Doing so had cost parts of his abdomen, making him no stranger to suffering. Perhaps knowing pain like a close friend explained the way Fritz cared for people. He owned a vineyard in Germany that provided employment. He even donated a swimming pool to the community, the first with a wave machine. Serving people with wine and waves was only made possible by the foundations Fritz built at home. He deeply loved his wife, Charlotte, whom he'd married in 1920. They raised 2 children in Ratibor, a German town then near the Polish border. For my Oma and her younger brother Manfred, trust and accountability were stalwarts in their childhood home, just as they are in this book. Yet the claws of war weren't finished with my family. In 1933, a new regime seized power in Germany. It wielded a new weapon far more devastating than any aircraft, tank or ship. A tool still prized by governments today. Total knowledge of the population. This knowledge was to shatter Fritz's family, country, and the world. It identified and conscripted his only son, Manfred, barely more than a boy. It pinpointed his own military experience, promoting him to major and a new command. It forced him, like countless others caught in the dragnet, into the uniform of the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of Nazi Germany. The war's start. I vividly remember my Oma sharing stories of those days. When I was young, she relived the events of September 1st, 1939. On that fateful night, her country's mechanized vehicles of war unexpectedly rumbled through her town towards Poland. As a teenage girl, the smell of exhaust fumes and the rattle of the Panzer tank tracks left an indelible impression on her. She'd experienced the genesis of World War II firsthand. This new war scarred more than my Oma's side of the family. 9 months later, and just 1,100 kilometres to the west, a separate struggle unfolded. There, on the beaches of Dunkirk, stood a certain British warrant officer, Bill. He faced the relentless onslaught of the Nazi Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Yet fate had plans for him beyond the bullets. He was to become my Oma's husband and my paternal grandfather. Bill had deployed to France with the British Expeditionary Force after Germany's 1940 invasion. His signals unit provided vital communication while over 300,000 British and French troops were evacuated from Dunkirk between May 26 and June 4. Bill's duties allowed others to escape while he was relentlessly strafed by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. He was one of the last to leave that beach. My grandfather stared directly down the throat of authoritarianism and understood what governments could make people do to each other. He saw the consequences that this book warns of from the outside, while my Oma saw them from the inside. Yet, before we explore what all this has to do with governments knowing too much about us, let's jump forward a few years. The war's end. By 1945, the war in Europe was drawing to a bloody conclusion. Fritz and what was left of his family were living in Berlin, where he'd been stationed. Manfred had fallen in Operation Barbarossa, the war against the Soviet Union. My family had lost its youngest, and the country was in ruins. Yet even as Allied forces neared Berlin, the crumbling Nazi regime kept using its devastating weapon. Children and the elderly alike were quickly identified through the National Population Registry. Under threat of death, they were deployed to frontline positions, expendable resources to their government. My Oma was no exception. I recall one tale she shared that to this day feels like fiction. She'd been ordered to shoulder a bazooka, as she described it, in defense of the city. She was unable to even lift it. Deploying young women in urban tank combat highlights a point crucial for our discussion. The crumbling nation's collective psyche had been long conditioned into normalizing the unimaginable. Like all tyrants, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had for years terrorized the population's fertile minds by tirelessly seeding fear. A key tactic was to portray the approaching enemy as savages. African American soldiers were especially demonized. Government lies had firmly entrenched hatred of these so-called animals in the German mindset. My then 22-year-old Oma came face to face with these fears one day amidst the chaos as Berlin fell. A twist of fate was to teach a timeless lesson. Left to fend for themselves, my Oma and her mother had found refuge from the war-torn streets in a basement. Like a scene from the movie Downfall, the two vulnerable women huddled in the dark. Only shadows and prayer protected them as Allied troops took Berlin. My Oma recalled Nazi propaganda racing through her mind while the vicious sounds and smells of war crept closer. Suddenly, the basement door burst open with a thunderous kick, showering the room with wooden splinters. Startled, the women looked up. Blocking the doorway at the top of the staircase stood a dishevelled figure shrouded in smoke. An African American in US Army uniform. My Oma's mouth went dry. The weight of imminent death bore down as she stared into her Grim Reaper's eyes. Her heart quivered with terror, sorrow, stolen hopes, and unsaid farewells. Manfred, she thought, I'll see you soon. It's surreal to me that my very ability to write this book came down to that soldier's split-second decision. He held the fate of my entire family line in his blood-stained hands. Labeling the cowering women as victims, not perpetrators, was a complex choice we'll unravel in the following chapters. In broken German, he offered the only words he knew to soothe their fear before moving on. Danke, bitte, guten Tag. Thanks, please, good day. Little did he realize that those 4 simple words spoken in that basement on that day would far outlive the terrified women who heard them. They did their job in communicating his peaceful intent, yet they also offered a fundamental lesson. Those 4 words hit my Oma with a metaphorical force every bit as powerful as the ordnance exploding outside. It was the force of reality clashing with the lies of her government. With that story, my Oma taught me that the truth sets us free. One man's hobbled-together parting gesture had shattered the cumulative propaganda of one of the world's strongest military empires. Everything the Nazi regime had inflicted on its people, including compulsory identity registration, had been sold as a necessary protection against evils that had just proven themselves benign. In a very visceral sense, my Oma experienced the end of World War II in Europe just as she had its beginning. A dance of reconciliation. The war's end birthed a fundamental identity crisis. Germany had entrusted the government to define individual and national worth. Its absence left people adrift, having relinquished the independent self-identity my Oma had taught me to nurture. This left German survivors with 2 struggles. They faced the harsh realities of rebuilding shattered lives, yet they also needed to fundamentally rediscover who they were. My family found their place in this challenging era's intricate fabric, weaving their own modest contribution. Fritz survived the war and was reunited with the family. They lived under British occupation in Viennenburg as they tried to process the loss of their beloved Manfred. Food was distributed via rationing and families were required to share accommodation. My family lived with a man named Nierim. He was a skilled dolmetscher, or interpreter, and happened to work for the British Commandant in charge of their occupied area. My Oma described the Commandant to me as progressive. He was someone who understood that these conditions were unsustainable. The Commandant saw several problems. These included the imbalance of supplies and the generally held us and them mentality that segregated the people and hindered post-war integration. He decided to act and solicited suggestions for ways to ease the feeling of occupation in his region. Neerim suggested that a good way to begin would be to hold a social ball. Locals would be invited, along with members of the occupying military. The gathering would represent a symbolic olive branch that was funded and catered by the British. The Commandant initially expressed hesitation at this idea, doubting any expectation of German attendance. In response, Neerim noted that he shared accommodation with a German family, my family, that was well regarded in the community. In perfect English, he offered that if they went, he'd be confident other German families would also attend, ensuring the event's success. The solution was elegant, and the ball was approved. Keen on maintaining decorum, the Commandant personally oversaw the evening's proceedings. My Oma and her mother were even honoured with seats at the distinguished head table alongside him. This both signalled a sense of unity and recognised their pivotal role in garnering public support. One of the soldiers at that ball was my grandfather, Bill. He was impeccably presented with an unmistakable air of British refinement. My Oma recounted that he was the only one to approach her asking her to dance. I still smile thinking of him defying the unspoken rule of the officers' table. The ball was a huge success. It didn't just bring my grandparents together for their first dance, but offered a glimmer of hope for others. Their joy was infectious, and together they organised other similar events in their community. These efforts took time. The post-war era was an extended period of difficulty. It required investment from those like my Oma, her mother, Neerim, and his insightful Commandant. My Oma even confessed to me that the ball had been an opportunity to augment the family rations by discreetly stuffing food in their pockets. The suffering and fear of the German people during the war and the years that preceded and followed it have not been an area of historical focus. History spotlights the justifiably gallant actions of liberating armies and their cultures, yet it perhaps poorly features the suffering and gallantry of those forgotten citizens within the borders of runaway authoritarian regimes. In the case of Nazi Germany, ordinary Germans had to contend with enemies both foreign and domestic. They were equally at war with their own government as they were with troops abroad. The resilience demonstrated by my grandparents in the face of tyranny is not just family law, it represents the universal struggle for sovereignty over our destinies. Central themes. 3 themes still dance in my mind when I reflect on those old stories. They offer timeless guidance we've forgotten. Their insights are deeply relevant to the topic of digital ID, and we'll explore them together in this book. Theme 1. The tyranny of human commodification. The main theme relates to humanity's perennial struggle against identity-based tyranny. My Oma saw nationalised identification unveil who people were and what they could do. She equally saw nationalised surveillance unveil where they were and what they were doing. Merged and enforced by the police state, they eroded the very fabric of life. My family felt the horror that this reality produced. They saw what happens on both sides of a national border when governments get a taste for commodifying the people they supposedly serve. They prayed our generation would safeguard the balance of knowledge, never again letting it tip towards those in power. We're about to explore that disequilibrium. Together, we'll uncover the nature of centralized government identity registration, warts and all. We'll learn how the Nazis shrouded the construction of such a system with ornamental justifications, later weaponizing it to inflict unimaginable horror on everyone. Let's start with a profound observation from my grandparents. Their opposing wartime experiences converged on a singular, piercing insight, a truth still relevant today. With absolute knowledge of a population's identity comes absolute command of its destiny. What is digital ID? Digital ID is the way absolute knowledge of a population is implemented today. It's a chameleon that pops up in our modern lives and is often sold as beneficial, yet it shares bones with the very identification and surveillance systems that my grandparents warned of. It's hard to precisely define. Centralized government digital ID is a system where one political authority manages all aspects of how you identify online. It's not just a bunch of websites or apps, but a unified database that uses your characteristics to determine your suitability for goods and services across different areas of life. It can pull data from various sources, like surveillance and census history. We should ask some important questions. How do these modern systems differ from their historical counterparts? What safeguards are in place today? Where can we see contemporary examples of their misuse? Digital ID advocates argue that today's technology offers a range of identification benefits. These include increased convenience, enhanced safety, and reduced bureaucracy. We're told that democratic oversight differs greatly from the past, and that new laws plug loopholes that tyrants can creep through. Should we trust that these eclectic claims will collectively protect our rights? Have these arguments been used to dismiss similar concerns before? Answering these questions means examining both the pros and cons of these systems. Yet we must do this through the historical lens of how identification and surveillance become weapons when checks and balances fail. The historical context. The Nazis meticulously tracked everyone with identity cards. These formed a suite of oppressive tools, including the Volkskartei, the German population registry. Increasingly, the government knew more about the people than the people knew about their government. This asymmetry bred constant fear, as individuals were blind to the information held about them. Identity data had immediate utility. Office of Statistics Director Friedrich Bergdorfer used population census data to aid the Wehrmacht as early as 1936. His calculations predicted that by 1940, Germany could wage war against Poland and France combined. By then, over 300,000 Germans would reach military draft age annually. Identification was so crucial to the regime that census takers closely followed the army into newly occupied territories. People were categorized and segregated. Statisticians stole identity from the living, just as soldiers had stolen breath from the dead. What identified you directly impacted what happened to you. A timeless struggle for freedom. This is no academic study. My Oma grew up in an era that showcased the power of this knowledge. She saw evil sanctioned by badges on uniforms and pistols on belts. It was a time when identifying as Aryan temporarily bought survival from the authorities. It's often said, you don't know what you've got until it's gone, and there's no more painful loss than that of individual freedom. My Oma's moral obligation was to pass these lessons to me, just as it's mine to pass them to you. As my Oma would often say, and she wasn't alone, protect your privacy and your freedom They are your greatest treasures. Her words echo a chorus of historical figures who have felt the sting of tyranny. Take Patrick Henry, one of America's founding fathers and the first governor of Virginia. Henry lived through an era when identifying as loyal to a monarch rather than purebred to a dictator was the cost of temporary survival. He urged us to guard with jealous attention the public liberty and suspect everyone who comes near that precious jewel. We should ignore these warnings at our great peril. You and I, both, and millions like us, have inherited the precious jewel of freedom. It was earned by the sacrifice of brave men and women who bled before us. It is not ours to give away. What are we doing to protect this treasure? Does the unearned invite disregard? Intergenerational lessons are as fragile as snowflakes in the midday sun. We tend to dismiss them, only to relearn them anew once they've melted. Theme 2. Eternal Vigilance. The second theme closely mirrors the first. It highlights the enduring cost of liberty, eternal vigilance. The defeat of Hitler's particular brand of tyranny did nothing to secure a struggle-free future. On the contrary, persistent efforts to abuse humanity through identity registration are nearly inevitable. Examples have continually surfaced throughout history. Each attempt comes cloaked in appealing slogans and serves to exploit the social anxieties of the day. Yet despite these disguises, the unmistakable hallmarks of human stock-taking remain. Appeals to efficiency and virtue, manipulation, dehumanization, and punishment. Recognizing these recurring patterns helps us to look beyond apathy and see the slow encroachment of these systems. They're so pervasive that my grandparents faced the threat twice in their lives. The Australia card proposal emerged 4 decades and half a world away from their survival of Europe's identity predator. Their adopted country proved that vigilant and invested people can bridge all divides to pay forward liberty's debt. Tyranny is a patient foe. It hibernates in the shadows for decades. It awakens cloaked as the alibi of our collective safety, yet regards us with contempt and our children with disdain. Its oxygen is propaganda, and its kryptonite is vigilance. Our modern obligations. Today, it's our turn. On our watch, governments continue to exert control in ever more aspects of our lives. Global institutions are standardizing their policies, while trust in democratic processes continues to fall. Force increasingly replaces debate as tyranny again awakens. We own this problem. For years, our society has prioritized hedonism. We've allowed technology to scratch the itch of everyday convenience, and that comfort has corroded our vigilance. Are we truly ready for digital ID in this environment? Its adoption amidst new artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML software remains unproven. New innovations invite an unprecedented level of authoritarianism at a time when we've never been more surveilled. The modern tyrant's toolkit is slick. Concerns over its use to suppress speech, limit travel, and restrict consumption are growing. With increasingly eclectic and frantic justifications, it can be hard to know how far down the slippery slope we've slid. We risk navigating these waters blindly without historical grounding. The historical context. We are, fortunately, not totally without guidance. History shows how authoritarian regimes exploit crises to push their agendas. A key tactic is deploying technology for human identification and surveillance. In this area, the warnings from 1930s Germany are particularly relevant today for those willing to see. This wasn't an ancient culture from which we've fundamentally evolved. These horrors are less than a century old, just 2 or 3 generations. It wasn't a society that had lost its moral compass. Germany was profoundly Christian at the time. Nazi registration and census policies weren't historical aberrations. They parallel the digital ID and surveillance protocols governments are hurriedly adopting today, seemingly without care, caution, or concern, let alone debate, discretion, or deliberation. So what was the outcome? Once the Nazis identified your competencies, you were condemned to mandatory work assignments. These were aligned with the war effort. In a very real sense, you became a slave, unable to control the most basic parts of life, like where to live and when to wake up for work. Nazi statisticians produced benchmarks for expected human work output. If your productivity fell short of that anticipated based on a deep knowledge of your identity, you were considered deficient. Malnourished slaves, German or otherwise, working too slowly in Nazi factories were, quote, beaten to death, end quote. Today, we offer these metrics willingly with cloud-connected Fitbits and live security camera feeds from within our homes and workplaces. In contrast, once the Nazis identified your deficiencies, you were condemned to sterilization or murder. Population statistics coldly identified those of economic value to the government and those who weren't. This metric was all that mattered once identity registration had sufficiently dehumanized the population. Today, many are compelled to advertise deficiencies and disabilities to the government in return for payments or perks. This is not how we're supposed to live. Yet it's one thing to understand the need to be vigilant and another to know how. Many may see this history and wish to fight fire with fire. I'd like to propose an alternative. Theme 3. Love offers a solution. The most personal theme from my grandparents' story is that love can prevail. My Oma personally witnessed the February 1945 Dresden bombing. She leapt from a train on the city outskirts and ran for cover under trees as 3,900 tons of explosives incinerated, asphyxiated, and buried alive up to 250,000 people. The resulting 1,600 acres of firestorms alone are thought to have killed tens of thousands of people. Despite seeing this, she married and deeply loved an honourable man who once fought under the same Union Jack worn by the Lancaster and Mosquito bomber pilots high above her that night. With love, great things are possible. Whether bombs falling from the sky or digital ID, evil can be overcome by finding the good in humanity, spreading awareness, and building alternative solutions. Love enables us to set aside our petty differences and focus on building a future worth living for, one where the need to rely on government to determine trust becomes obsolete. With love, we can get to know our communities personally and by reputation, rather than via government decree. Which brings us to my thesis. Thesis. This book's central argument is that we are unwittingly heading towards a cultural transformation. It's characterized by an uneven exchange of personal data between citizens and their governments. In this emerging framework, our characteristics are increasingly accessible to the state, while its nature is being increasingly obscured. We're also handing control to big companies mandating identification for their products and services. They can now shape our behaviour by limiting access to life's essentials when our views differ. We saw this during the COVID years. Restaurants and airlines alike would often require digital government ID as proof of compliance with prevailing mantras. Is this the liberty we inherited? Time to wake up. Our society, is suffering from a collective failure of imagination. We've become numb, distracted from the true path that governments and corporations are herding us down. We either can't or won't imagine the consequences of where we're heading. We also don't see what's possible if we choose a better path. Why is this so? Rational debate is vanishing from public discourse. New ideas are pushed outside the range of what's acceptable, the Overton window. We've lacked literature that connects these modern developments to their past consequences. Until now. You now hold this essential knowledge in your hands. We must use it to lovingly rouse those asleep to the dangers we face in the coming months and years. Everyday people must become advocates of a better future if our grandchildren are to enjoy the same freedoms our grandparents gifted us. This thesis argues that historical identity registries have led to disaster, and today's digital versions could lead to worse. Now is the time to act. Technology has never been more capable of identifying us at a time when anonymity has arguably never been less valued. Exploring this thesis requires us to consider how current generations interact with technology. Countless people casually use their faces to unlock their phones or submit their DNA to companies offering, quote, real science, real data, and genetic insights, end quote. They do this seemingly unaware of the grave historical consequences of revealing genetic data, starkly illustrated by the 1933 Law for the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring. The loss of privacy, especially genetic privacy, through these types of databases has resulted in real suffering. People have died, children have faced unspeakable atrocities, and entire lineages have been wiped out. It's our solemn duty to critically examine the infrastructure being deployed right now, rather than just offer it a cursory glance. Many find comfort in the belief that laws safeguard rights in the digital age. Yet Dr. John Lennox, a scholar and author at the crossroads of science, philosophy and religion, cautions otherwise. He worries that the reliability of these safeguards is uncertain without guidance from a universal moral standard. A law can equally forbid or mandate murder, but it can't explain why either is preferable. In his words, quote, Hitler in his political youth made treaties, but he tore them up once he got into power, end quote. There's potential for governments to misuse data even in democratic societies. It's particularly likely during crises when extraordinary measures seem justified. Laws are just formalizations of power, mirroring the perspectives of those able to inflict them. The human temptation for control can undermine the very democratic principles designed to restrict it. Voting treats others by consensus. It may be somewhat functional in cultures built on equal centers of power. Each can withhold value from the other to ensure negotiation occurs. Yet it's easily argued that the modern world has allowed great power imbalances. In such cases, one would expect similar asymmetry to be paralleled in the laws passed. Aren't we best simply preventing the construction of technical systems that are dangerous when legislation fails? We're comfortable making this argument with nuclear weapons or AI, but largely fail to apply it to digital ID. Deciding not to build infrastructure that may be weaponized by government is itself an act of democracy. The collective inaction of engineers and technicians is a vote to limit the power of the already powerful. We can do this if it's what we want. What do people really want? Some government digital ID advocates claim strong public demand and support. Yet research by Redfield and Wilton Strategies in July 2023 suggests otherwise. Results showed that the economy, taxation, immigration, crime, and election integrity are all primary concerns for voters. Digital ID didn't even make the list, which is surprising given that even don't know was included as a category. 18% of respondents cited government spending as a concern. This seems to place the burden of proof on those pushing for digital ID rather than those opposing it. The cost of implementing, running and maintaining such systems isn't trivial. Diverting funds from other areas may only exacerbate voter concerns. A related argument is that digital ID may reduce environmental impact. The idea suggests that reducing the use of physical documents reduces the footprint of identity management. Yet we must weigh this against the environmental toll of energy-hungry, large-scale, always-on data centres. Digital infrastructure must continue to consume resources while paper alternatives only do so once. If we value the environment, then we're best served by picking the low-hanging fruit first. This could mean focusing on the savings realised when the government abdicates its resource-hungry identity ambitions. Cutting government bureaucracy, as we see happening now with Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, could potentially reduce significantly more waste than introducing new bureaucratic measures. This thinking aligns far better with Redfield and Wilton's voter feedback. Anecdotal observations support this. The everyday conversations I hear revolve around the cost of living, immigration and housing pressures. Not once have I heard someone raise the lack of digital ID as their life's main hurdle. This prompts an important question. Does the legislative push for digital ID truly reflect the public's organic will? Or is it a policy driven by officials and passively accepted by a population preoccupied with more immediate concerns? Even if we concede a high demand for digital ID exists, advocates still must prove why the government should be the one to implement it. Their solutions tend to be slow, costly, and inferior to free market alternatives. Competitive environments force providers to jostle for voluntary customer patronage by offering superior products. These must demonstrate value to attract users, where mandated solutions can just rely on force. We must fully understand these motivations. Such questions are particularly important to ask when historical attempts to impose centralised government identity management, such as the Australia Card in the 1980s, were proven to use manufactured public support as a manipulative tool. Clearly, deciding what we want requires us to embark on quite a journey. Our journey. The what? The following pages expose the essence of human identity, reveal the nature of trust and technology, and converge on the true face of government. They shine a light on a litany of sins that must not be forgotten. This journey is interwoven with the fabric of my family's lived experiences. They show how identity is now a canvas upon which governments wield a formidable brush. Together, we'll delve into how we identify in the real world and the significant effects of doing so. Philosophical reasoning and case studies will help us link identity to resource denial and exploitation. This will deepen our self-knowledge and shed light on government efforts to eliminate our anonymity. We'll challenge the idea that governments are the sole architects of social order. Instead, their centralised character judgments and use of labels like terrorist and undesirables are dangerous and often political. We'll learn that trust, our social glue, shouldn't be delegated to an influential few, swayed by donors and drunk with power. It should grow organically within the community it benefits. Using original typewritten Nazi documents, the perils of government-led identity initiatives that claim to foster trust become clear. These ideas often come disguised as utopian visions of safety, security, and convenience, yet the interpretation of our identity data for these unobtainable dreams can shift with political climates, leading to retrospective judgments of innocence. Amidst these sombre reflections, we'll also uncover rays of positivity. Entrepreneurs and engineers the world over are currently crafting alternatives to this centralised future. In what's known as self-sovereign identity, or SSI, we find a beacon of hope. Could SSI be a life raft for those who dare to champion a future where we can reclaim control over that which identifies us online? But I must caution that this book will most certainly change you. You'll see the world with a fresh clarity and appreciate that dark forces have always seen our identity as the key to impose their political and social will at scale. Despite the Australian flavour, this journey may be superimposed upon any Western nation and beyond, many of which currently push similar agendas under differently named legislation. With your help, digital ID's predation will become a cornerstone of everyday discussion. Perhaps its abolition will rank at the top of Redfield and Wilton's next voter survey. By the end of our journey, you'll become a custodian of important truths that come with an obligation to share. You may also face difficulties inherent to most pursuits of value. The how. It's important to reflect on the tone we adopt as we delve into these narratives. The urgency and intensity that permeate our discourse are not without purpose. In times when society's vigilance wanes and the stakes are high, a forceful articulation is not just a stylistic choice, but a moral imperative. Such a tone may draw criticism, often labelled as alarmist or conspiratorial. Yet this is a small price to pay if it adequately conveys the gravity of the situation. We aren't playing games. If history's taught us anything, it's that complacency can lead to catastrophe. If our warnings are heeded and we err on the side of caution with digital ID, then that's a victory. But if we throw caution to the wind and our concerns are vindicated, then we may wish we'd chosen a stronger tone as we struggle to sleep at night. Accusations of alarmism are common techniques against those who challenge mainstream narratives. Labelling dissenting or unpalatable views in this way is an ad hominem attack, an emotional reaction when deeply held beliefs are challenged. This linguistic tactic criticizes the person or their motives instead of engaging with the argument itself. It's behavior that reveals a lack of rational thought, and such labels can generally be dismissed as something other than logical civil discussion. In an era dominated by fake news and fact-checking, ad hominem attacks abruptly halt discussion based on emotion, not dispassionate facts. They are the rhetorical equivalent of pulling the fire alarm at a graduation dinner. One would hardly remain in one's chair continuing to eat until evidence of the alarm's validity materializes. The cry, "Fake news!" sees people rush to the exits, asking questions later, if at all. This approach doesn't resolve debate, but highlights the fact that more is needed. These tactics can be attributed to a misunderstanding of time horizons. Months and years may pass without any manifestation of the warnings in this book. Yet we don't know where we fit in the broader cycle of human behaviour over decades and centuries. Accusations of alarmism fail to recognise this book as a risk mitigation for possibly unlikely yet severe outcomes. They fail to acknowledge that encountering these events is likely inevitable, given enough time. We are arguably alarmist in other areas of importance. Advocating for seatbelts with graphic warnings might seem so to those who've never experienced accidents, yet the risk of encountering a drunk driver looms at every intersection. Normalcy bias, the idea that what happened yesterday will continue tomorrow, does nothing to protect us from the next identity-abusing regime, perhaps lurking just around the corner. The why. It's now time to ask perhaps the most important question of our journey. Why? The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." So why should the rejection of centralised government-controlled digital ID be of interest to us? What makes it worth sacrificing an evening with our favourite streaming services or a weekend fishing with friends to consider? It's because these systems threaten the very freedoms that permit us to stream video and go fishing with friends. Knowledge of identity is possession of the means to define what that identity is and what it's allowed to do. Without the freedom to keep our identities to ourselves, all other topics of discussion are academic. By handing custody of our characteristics to a centralized digital authority, we risk rendering all other pursuits meaningless. If you value your streaming and fishing, you by default value your anonymity. What are our choices? We are poised at the precipice of a decision that will change civilization. The first option is to firmly claim title to the countless qualities that comprise our individual identities, and hence the sovereignty to decide our own futures. The second option is to collectively abandon our identities to a monolithic, centralized digital database where our every thought, feeling, and action is surveilled, and one-size-fits-all policies and punishments are imposed without hope of redress. I'm going to help you with that choice. We need to make this decision quickly. Liberty's flame is fragile. It's not passed to our children in the bloodstream. It's like an Olympic torch, held and protected by every generation's run, before being handed to the next, for them to do the same. My intention with this book is to keep that vulnerable flame of liberty alive, to keep my Oma's cautionary tales where they belong, in the past. We all have a moral obligation to point out threats to that precious jewel. My hope is that you arrive at the same conclusions as a particular British warrant officer and the daughter of a German major once did. Their stories allow us to imagine a future scenario, as speculative as it may be. Left unchecked, government identification and surveillance in the new age of AI could be the perfect tools for tyrants, present or future, to deprive our children of life's essence. This isn't a prediction, but a distinct possibility. It's one that's previously become a reality. Behind the bars of future digital gulags, should such a grim future come to pass, your enslaved children will wonder why their parents' love for them was insufficient to fight against such policies when there was still time. For these reasons, we should be interested in digital ID. Its hurried and uncharted rollout could be a Trojan horse that risks extinguishing liberty's flame for generations, if not forever. Our tolerance for this injustice should be paper thin. If we truly live in a society that values inclusion and equality as we constantly claim, then now is the time to put talk into action. This book may help spark enough good souls into action to avoid that future. It may just save our children's lives. There are moments in history that call upon people of the lesser nobility to perform feats of the greater purpose. I extend an invitation to join me on this quest, and should you accept, breathe deeply and turn the page. Things are about to get dark.